Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this edition of ICR, Investigating Community Resilience. We continue with this edition with further discussions with our executive producer, Bob Russell. And Bob, good to see you again. Thanks for being here. I've got to start, however, with acknowledging what is so obvious. You've been in a fight against cancer, and that battle continues.
Yep.
And I just marvel over these months,
Right.
through all of the work we've continued to do, at your strength and your continuing on and your commitment to so much work and effort. So I begin with this question: from what well are you drawing this strength in the face of your struggle?
Well, I think from my family and my community and all the work I've done in the last 25 years just continues to come back. And there's been fundraisers, there's been gatherings, there's been healing circles, and they've all helped not only me, but they've helped the community deal with my passing. A lot of people don't want to let me go, but we all have to go somewhere and sometime, and I'm getting used to that. And it's helping the community look back at what I've been able to do and what with them, and drawing on that strength and say, well, carry on. But there's a lot of work to do. So it'll happen.
So the people around you continue to feed back, the people that you've connected to.
Yep.
Through your life and your life's work.
Right.
Continue to feed back, even at this moment of extreme struggle.
Right, and I haven't made a lot of enemies. I was a more fierce kind of guy early on, but realized we did a bunch of conflict resolution and listening skill workshops early in the 90s and consensus building, and realized that was much better than head-to-head combat. That cooperation, listening, resolving problems, the things we don't really learn very well anymore, we had to reteach ourselves. So
this is so fascinating that in the course of your life, as you learned from, as you just expressed early on, a little bit of headbutting and confrontational action, to cooperation, consensus building, and yet our cultural society development over those same years hasn't mirrored that at all. This is where we left off our last discussion, that this sense of cooperation and need to compromise in order to find the common decision, the common good, is just not part of what's going on in our culture.
We've shifted the other way. And as we were moving towards that kind of work, it seems like society and our culture is moving the other way. That I don't remember exact dates, but at some point we started calling ourselves consumers, not citizens, which was an error.
Well, this is something you've pointed out several times, and I think what you were just searching for the beginning. When did this begin? That the society began moving in a different direction. It certainly had to do with, back the 80s, when we really singly began to define us as consumers, as an economic interest only.
Yeah, Ronald Reagan. He started that. Good or bad, he's a hero to the right. I'm not going to diss him, but he started moving in that direction. The government's the problem, not the solution. And for so many years we had relied on, from the Great Depression and all of that, relied on government to help us.
It does seem like that's an absolute, that is a factual fulcrum, that our culture began to move back to a re-emphasis on the individual apart from the group, the government in that case, to pick an entity, but that we were really moving back with the Reagan era and since then into this focus on individualism.
Right, and the rest of the world, and it's always a continuum, it's long ago we did the nice bell-shaped curve, and the individual being the most important thing in society, or the community. When we started to get off track globally was when the rest of the world they've always been that way, shifted more to where the community was more important than an individual. They shifted a little bit too far to the community, we shifted too far to the individual, and so we're sort of at cross purposes now. We can't cooperate globally. Probably why we can't get a climate change treaty.
Tends to be the case that human endeavor always overshoots, goes beyond the reasonableness of its either its motive or its resources, and we always overshoot the mark, whether we go too far towards the individual, too far towards the collective.
Yeah, and we're stuck, and we'll have to come back. We will. We'll see the light at some point. We just crossed the 400 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. So
we're crossing again, pushing again into an overshoot position, and rebalance will be what we need. You've been doing an awful lot of reading.
Yeah.
Give us some of what you've been pushing on and reading. Again, it's amazing to me that you continue to push and push and push to fill your head with more knowledge in the face of this.
I don't know how I'll dump it out, but I'm dumping it out now.
Okay.
But I've read, this is the State of the World books that have been published since, I think,
1986, somewhere late 80s.
Yeah, late 80s. I have every one of them. This is the 2013 version, and it's called, they titled it as Sustainability Still Possible, done by the World Watch Institute. And one of the highlighted chapters from the Resilience website has been this one called Governance, the Long Emergency. And that's what we're really, if we can't fix the governance piece, it's hard to fix the other stuff.
If we can't come together to make a public decision that's reasoned and effective,
right,
we can't get the other jobs done.
Right. And we're already too late on some of them in that Americans always have been into fairness. They think fairness is important. And unfortunately, they don't get the connection that because of bad science that we've shifted into, that most of the CO2 that's in the atmosphere is really from the industrialized countries. So the developing countries will suffer for centuries based on our past actions. And we really should feel an obligation to help them adapt with, levees and buffers and land and food and energy, because it's been our overuse of the atmospheric commons that has caused this despair and the shift. And that's fair. We should fix it. We should try to fix it.
You used the word commons there, and you said atmospheric commons. Is this a struggle that we're still having, that humans can't come together on a view of commons? I mean, I suspect that there are actually a good number of my fellow citizens, our fellow citizens in this country, who still think that nature is there for our taking.
Right.
It's not a commons that we all share. It's a commons in that we're all free to go grab and get and use to our own benefit if we're able. But otherwise not a commons that we share connections and responsibilities with.
And that's wrong. We do share that common and the connection. And it was the enclosure movement in England a long time ago. Our history is bad, we don't learn history well, but the English started closing the commons, back in the 13, 14, 1500s. And that started taking away the commons where people used to share, and we could manage them. And then there was a bunch of essays about how we couldn't manage them written, but then Elinor Ostrom, back in 2009, the only woman to ever get the economic Nobel Prize. Right. Figured out that yes, we can manage the commons. There's a lot of examples of how the commons can be managed for everybody to use, and it works. And that's the shift we have to get back to. She wrote a whole book about it. She won a Nobel Prize about it. That's the direction that is helpful for us to go in.
It seems like such a difficult time because it seems as if it's a struggle that is almost natural for a culture to go through. I wonder if we're not old enough yet as a society and a culture. We, after all, came from a country, an experience, a cultural experience of this tremendous open frontier where the concept of the commons got buried because it was the open land that was so available to the individual and individualism. And that's a root in our culture that I don't know that we've outgrown that.
Yeah, and I think we went past that. See, when we were hunter-gatherers and more indigenous people, we took better care of the commons. You know, and then when we shifted into finding, you know, sharing resources better, you know, agriculture, then we shifted back to, you know, not taking care of the commons really well.
And I think in there is another point that you and I have talked about even in these discussions, and that is that our modern experience of being able to get such abundant resource at such relatively cheap cost from nature, from the skin of the earth, from the ecosystem that we live in, that it's almost become the view, I think it has with so many folks, that we own nature. We dominate nature. We don't live still rooted in it and therefore under its influence and laws. But the commons also has a recognition of it, has to come from a recognition that we don't own nature, we don't dominate it, we don't command it, and we don't rule its rules.
But
physics. I think that's a point we have yet to see in our society.
And we need to figure that out, and I'm not sure who and how that will transpire, but it will eventually happen. I think that the planet, you know, people say we have to save the planet. No, the planet's been here for 1 billion years. It's going to be here. It's what kind of ecosystem services will be available to the life forms on this planet. And that's what we're messing with right now. We've had this long 100,000 year span of stable climate we've evolved in. We're ruining that. So we have to adjust and adapt. And
to be sure the planet will. So really, it's not saving the planet so much as saving ourselves. Saving ourselves within this nested set of experiences of life on the planet.
And we're all going to move north, because that's where it's going to be habitable, you know, pretty much north. And it'll, you know, we have such a short time span. Like I love, that's what I like about Science Friday with Ira Flatow. They went back, you know, looking at dinosaurs a long time ago. You know, 100 million years from now, this will be a way different place. Who knows what will be here? We're just living through this little journey here. And then there's a book that...
One more pieces of your wide-ranging...
I think that it was in this
reading
book.
List.
Is that, if I can find the graphic...
Well, this is
this one right here. This is the, we think that fossil fuels have been here forever and we're going to just ride it on out. Here's Hubbard's thing where we cruised along here, then went blip, blip. There won't be any more.
We're looking at a long frame of society in history, time in that graph, and the fossil fuel age is that narrow little spike in the middle. Yes.
Right. And that's allowed us to have 7 billion people, all this food. That's all going to disappear.
And I think the extreme concentration of the energy that's in oil and fossil fuels, but particularly the oil version of that, has given us this sense that, my goodness, we rule nature. We have the energy to rule nature. And it's a fundamental rule of our resilience thinking that, in fact, we are a human community tied to the ecosystem and still desperately need and benefit from the ecosystem services that are still provided to us that we do not control. By the way, give us the title of that book again, because it was a good example of something you've referenced to me often, and that is a reader of a number of different thoughts.
The Localization Reader, Adapting to Coming Downshift, The Coming Downshift by Ray DeYoung and Tom Princeton.
The Localization Reader, Adapting to the Coming Downshift. There's a great concept right there, the downshift.
And if you were going to be teaching principles of resilience, There's a lot of good textbooks out now, and here's a really Principles of Ecosystem Stewardship, Resilience-Based Natural Resource Management in a Changing World. And it's really full of great, references to all kinds of stuff.
And I'm sure full of great discussion and examples of adaptation, because that's really what our resilience focus has to understand. The planet, let's go back 60 million years, went through a great shuddering impact of some sort that wiped out the dinosaurs, the great extinction. But the planet wasn't wiped out, and life, in fact, came back, but wholly different. It was adaptation, not bounce back.
Right. It's changing state. You don't always go back to the same place you were.
And we know that we won't.
No.
A principle of our discussion is our future will be different than our past.
Has to be.
And we will be moving to a whole new state, in fact.
Right. And I think that one of the biggest things about that is the fossil fuel energy available. Even if we found more, got more, we can't dump more. People don't realize you can't dump more in the atmosphere. You can't extract fracking, you can't extract tar sands, the more you put in the atmosphere, the climate becomes more and more unstable. So it's just locked out. They have to be left in the ground. There's a word for that, stranded assets. It's like what happened with typewriter ribbons.
Well, this is one of the, yes.
we don't need them anymore.
And there were warehouses full of typewriter ribbons that were not needed anymore.
There's a whole bunch of oil under the ground that we can't burn, because if we burn it, we kill the planet. Not the planet, we kill us.
But one of the problems going on exactly right now is this headline discussion of how the fracking technology in America has now pushed any horizon of peak oil way off into the future. That peak oil is no longer a threat. That is terrible news from a public relations standpoint for the atmosphere.
It is.
For the impact on the climate, because I'm afraid that this news that there is no energy threshold threat will cause us again to overshoot and just burn more and more and consume more and more.
And what we're running up against is water shortages, because it takes so much water to frack.
Well, and we run up against an energy supply that is so much more costly, so much more low value in that sense, than what we use to build all of this. And I believe that we can continue on as we have with our consumptive society. Consumptive of resources simply isn't going to play, because our resources from here on will be so much more higher cost, lower value.
And the other thing, even energy in general, all this, we have quite a bit of nuke. About 20% of our energy is nukes. And the warmer it gets, people don't, it's the understanding of thermodynamics. You have to cool nuclear plants for them to make energy. And a couple years ago, during that really hot summer, they had to stop making as much energy from the nuclear plants in the Tennessee Valley because the water was too hot going in to cool the turbines off.
They couldn't cool it fast enough in those giant towers. That's right.
So,
in a warming atmosphere.
Right. So there's all these synergies of the warmer it gets, the less energy you can make, and as we run out of water, the less fracking you can do. It's all catching up. I mean, we've been on this we're on a finite planet living like it's an infinite, and it's not working.
This is one of the critical understandings about peak oil, to use that term, is that it's not ever about running out. It's about the complications of resource use at all, and it's so very complicated that the oil issue may depend upon the water issue. The water issue may be dependent upon snowpack that's no longer there, or a changed rain pattern, and it's all tied together.
And then it's all tied on money, because the economic value of all our food is produced with fossil fuel, pretty much, really 10 to 1, and energy is more expensive. Food's going to be more expensive, it's going to be, political unrest everywhere because the money that it costs to get the oil out of the ground is going to be more. There'll be less left for food. We used to pay a whole percentage of our income went to buy food. Now it's that less than 10% for us.
In this country, that's correct.
But in other countries where all of a sudden, if the price of grain doubles, their food doubles because they buy the grain and use it.
Well, and we're sitting on a tinderbox there because in certain key countries, Egypt being perhaps the most obvious example, simply the government bread subsidy has been ingrained as such a part of the culture and will be such an economic struggle to get away from, and yet it comes down to food in people's bellies that we're talking about there, and the turmoil over that will be difficult, to say the least.
I remember, I've been reading this for a long time, but like 20 some years ago when these books first came out, when Lester Brown used to work for the World Watch Institute, he talked about a bushel of wheat was equivalent to a barrel of oil. And that's when there was equity between, you could trade, our country could trade wheat for oil. And then when the oil crisis came, that was no longer true. So we couldn't trade any. We couldn't make that trade anymore. And it just got more and more expensive to try to do that. I mean, there's all kinds of boundaries we've passed now that we used to live by these energy boundaries and they're gone.
Will the change then, if we've gone beyond so many boundaries, we've overshot, as you and I have just detailed there briefly in so many ways, but will the change then come with some sort of breakdown that really brings about localism? I mean, part of this is the fragility of the large global systems. They're very fragile.
Right.
Will part of the solution come from a real birth and redevelopment of much more local structures?
I think they will, and that, here in Traverse City area, we have the Commons where they're trying to build the food hub, where the food from our area, however big the area gets, will come in and be processed. And that's what we've been lacking is, food processing and capabilities for our own local food. It happened years ago. I remember my dad was in the gas station business and sold pop, Coca-Cola. And for a long time, it came in glass bottles, and people bring them back, and they'd pick up the glass and go back and bottle it. Well, there was a transition period where they decided to get a lighter container, like aluminum, and started making the consumer throw them away instead of having them refilled. That changed the whole dynamic of local economics. There was no bottling plant locally anymore. It was one big, large bottling plant, and then nothing went back to it.
This comes from our defining the measure of our success as a society, a culture, and even as individual people in economic metrics only. That is, we were consumers there. And there was no thought then really about the waste stream in that period of moving from that glass recycled bottle to the aluminum can. And we were consumer, which meant throw away, was not part of our concern. Throw it away, take care of the...
And then we've always been doing that with soil. Whether it comes from the Central Valley in California, it comes from the Midwest. We ship food all over, and of course to grow food, it's not just sunlight and water, it's all the soil nutrients. And all those nutrients are packed up and go away, and they never come back. And what we have going for us locally is we have a really good state-of-the-art wastewater treatment plant with really good industrial pre-treatment. So the sludge from our plant is plowed under out in Leelanau County and reused to add to soil. And
the loop there is the nutrient of the food that we have consumed and goes through the sewage processing system of our own bodies and the city system is then reapplied to the soil, to the ground locally.
And it should be non-toxic, and that's what we're working on.
Which is part of the kind of looping model that future sustainable, resilient, local communities
Need to experiment with.
must experiment with, and then ultimately begin to develop, because it's that kind of looping is part of the definition, really, of sustainability.
Yeah, I think one of the show we did with Bill Cucci, is it Cucci?
Mm-hmm.
The biodiesel guy. Brilliant idea. Grow canola oil, lease it to the restaurants, and when they're done with it,
as food grade oil,
when it's done, make biodiesel out of it, connect the cycle.
return the biodiesel to the grower who's growing the canola, who's producing the food grade oil.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So,
Which then brings us to another interesting point of how complicated this is for us as a challenge to develop this kind of resilience, because Bill Kuski's biodiesel plant, Northwest Michigan Biodiesel, is too small to enter into the investment structures of our big world.
right.
We need, as we've said so often before, to develop these local investment structures so that we can support our own local scale.
And we do have now the local
Investments.
investmentnetwork.org that we helped start with Michael Schumann, that's sort of got its life of its own, kind of moving forward. And that's, there's enough money in the area for us to be self-financing.
Really enough money in any community compared to what they're operating with now to do some self-financing, because of all the things every single community exports and loses, the one that's common to every one of them is their money,
Right.
their investment dollar, because we have this huge overarching financial structure that takes out our investment dollars and they're gone from us by and large.
It's like the stupidity we do when we grow all kinds of apples here and we don't use them, and they grow all kinds of apples in China, so we import apple juice from China, Brazil, and different places, and don't use our apple juice here. It's like shipping, bottled water from one side of the country to the other. It's foolish,
Those kinds of foolish behaviors will become more and more obvious with the cost of energy. And
Yeah.
that perhaps will be one of the driving focuses of pulling us back to local
Yeah.
structures as opposed to the global fragile
And
structure.
the other thing we have to really is get out of this. One of the ways to get out of the consumption pattern is to change it and not measure gross domestic product, or gross national product, and start measuring happiness index. Are we happier with less? How much money do we need to be happy? And a lot of places in the world have switched to happiness index. And Bhutan, which is in the mountains in Nepal, that's what their whole country is based on that. They got rid of the GDP, and they manage how happy their country works based on happiness index.
I've read this, and what you're actually saying, to be clear, is very officially, very
Yes.
consciously, they're measuring as a metric of the success of their society their happiness, not their economic income level.
Right.
Which is fascinating, and,
Right.
and again, it goes with the point you made a little bit earlier, that some of the very happiest societies, if you measure the happiness on the planet, are those that pay the most taxes, as a
Right.
matter of fact.
They take care of themselves the most. That's really what it is. They've shifted back to where the community is more important than the individual. That they will support their community through taxes, and they've made that shift back. They've backed off the edge of the individual is not the most important.
Bob, I've got to wrap us up here, but I have to tell you that your own life is a testimony to that very point, and that is that we have to make this shift. We will make the shift back towards the recognition of the community and the commons, as opposed to simply the individual, and it comes with a measure of happiness. So thank you for that demonstration, because you've been demonstrating so much of that to all of the rest of us.
And just to end with, I think we have a really good co-op. We have the commons that Ray Minervini has been doing. The shift will be the new ownership society. We will start to own more and more of our commons and control it. That's the shift.
And we will look to that day, and we will look to that in our next conversation, which we will pick up again. Right now, thank you all for being with us on this edition of ICR. Please join us next time.